He helped build the gallows. Well, it was a strange task for any man, but for this man, it was a work that sealed his own grim fate. He was the first soul to be sent into eternity from the very platform he had helped to construct. This is the story of George Rope, a man whose life was marked by deep colonial roots, profound personal tragedy, and a final, shocking act of violence. His tale is a stark reminder of how sorrow, when mixed with the poison of strong drink, can lead a person down a path from which there is no return. It is a story not just of a crime, but of a life unraveling thread by thread. The name George Rope might not be widely known today, but in the Mudgee district of New South Wales in 1875, it was a name whispered with a mixture of fear and pity. He was born in 1823 near Penrith, a man of average height but with a strong build, suited to the hard labor of his time. Yet the same world that forged him would witness the weaknesses that undid him. To understand George Rope, one must look back to the very beginnings of European settlement in Australia. He was not just any colonist, he was a direct descendant of First Fleeters. His grandparents were among the convicts, Anthony Rope and Elizabeth Rope, who made the perilous journey from England to Botany Bay, arriving in 1788. They were forced into a life they did not choose, but they ultimately survived. Their story is one of endurance, and they became a founding family. Their children, and their children's children, spread across the land. This lineage was a source of pride. They had been there from the start, witnessing the colony transform into a burgeoning society. Anthony and Elizabeth faced starvation, uncertainty, and the immense challenge of building life from nothing. Their survival and the family line were testaments to resilience. George Rope was born into this legacy, a man with deep roots in Australian soil. His ancestors helped build the new nation, and he, as a tradesman, continued that work. For a time, George Rope's life followed a conventional path. He married in his early 30s. He established his own wheelwright business. He found stability and purpose in work and family. But that contentment was tragically short-lived. The first blow, the death of his child. Shortly after, his wife was taken by fever, and another child died too. He was left utterly alone, adrift in grief. These losses broke something deep within him. He turned to the most available escape: rum. For 3 months after his wife's death, friends said he was never sober. The drink, at first a balm, soon became his master. He became, in the language of the time, a settled drunkard. Alcohol transformed him. The reliable craftsman grew erratic and unpredictable. When intoxicated, he became wild and dizzy. Friends often had to intervene and care for him. Fights and accidents left him with many scars: a severe blow to the back of his head at 36, a broken nose from another altercation. Drink, grief, and trauma together created a dangerous, unstable man. By 1875, George Rope's life had been reduced to a fragile existence near Lawson's Creek. He lived in a simple hut. His days were ruled by the unpredictable tides of his drinking. His brother Robert lived nearby, just 175 yards away. That proximity would soon become the stage for a terrible tragedy. The final key figure was Hannah Jane Rope, his sister-in-law, who lived with Robert. She was described as a quiet but firm woman of middle height, a respected and kind person. Hannah stood in stark contrast to the man George had become: a mother to 2 sons and a daughter, a wife to George's brother, a guardian of order and decency. She knew of his destructive habits and forbade him bringing alcohol into her home, out of protection, not cruelty. The fuse was lit on the 12th of April. George had acquired a quart of rum and went to Robert's home to share a drink. He called for Robert to join him. Hannah, hearing his slurred invitation, told him not to bring rum onto their property. Her boundary to his alcohol-addled mind was an intolerable provocation. His response was immediate and chilling: he would put an end to you. He stormed away to fetch the instrument of his rage. A quiet afternoon was about to be shattered by irreversible violence. Murder on Lawson's Creek. The moments that followed were swift and terrible. George Rope returned from his hut not with more words, but with a gun, already loaded and cocked for firing. He strode back towards his brother's home, his mind set on a dark purpose. Hannah's son, seeing his uncle approach with the weapon, bravely stepped forward. "Don't shoot anyone here, Uncle," the boy pleaded. George shoved him aside. "Stand back, Bill, or I'll put a bullet through you." Hearing the commotion, Hannah Jane Rope emerged from the house. "Don't do anything of the kind, George." Her plea for peace was met with a blast of gunfire. George turned the weapon on her and fired. The shot struck her on the left side of her abdomen. She collapsed, and the quiet of the bush was replaced by the sounds of shock and pain. In a fury of grief, her son wrenched the gun and broke it over George's head. Even wounded, George snarled that if he had a knife, he would stab her and let her guts out. A neighbor named Johnson rushed in, spade in hand, and held George still until help could arrive. When George Rope stood before the court, he entered a plea of not guilty. His defense mounted a vigorous case: long history of alcoholism, severe head injuries, erratic and often bizarre behavior. They painted a picture of a man broken by tragedy and trauma, a man not in control of himself on that day at Lawson's Creek. The plea was his only hope of escaping the hangman's noose. The jury listened, weighing a sorrowful life against the cold, hard facts. They heard how he threatened, walked away to fetch a weapon, and returned to carry out that threat with chilling deliberation. In the end, the argument for insanity failed. Guilty. The judge, donning the black cap, sentenced George Rope to death by hanging. Back in Mudgee jail, he sank into sullen despair. On October 22nd, he used a hidden piece of rusty steel to cut his arm. The wound was shallow. A chemist tended him. The depth of his hopelessness was laid bare. In the cold confines of his prison cell, George Rope faced the end of his life, withdrawn and despondent, lost in regret and fear. It was in this state that the Venerable Archdeacon Gunther and the Reverend F.W. Stretton began their patient ministry. They visited frequently, undeterred by his silence. They sat with him. They spoke words of comfort. They read from the scriptures, offering human connection in profound isolation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their persistence worked. George started to listen, to speak, to reflect on the terrible act that had brought him here. Under their gentle guidance, his hardened exterior softened. He showed sorrow and repentance. The chaplains believed it was sincere, a true penitence in his final days. Meanwhile, his family waged a desperate campaign, gathering signatures, pleading for clemency. They wept and begged. The law remained implacable. On his final Monday night, they said goodbye. George told them he remembered buying rum, falling over a log searching for the bottle, and nothing more until he woke under guard. The final act unfolded around a structure of wood and iron at the rear of the women's yard in Mudgee jail. The gallows stood 16 feet high, 2 feet above the jail wall. Below it, a 5-foot pit lined with bricks and cement. 12 steps led to a trap designed to fall with grim finality. The old gallows had been deemed unsafe. An order went out to rebuild, and prisoners were assigned the work. Local histories record that 2 of the men tasked were George Rope and George Pitt. Together they labored on the very instrument that would end both their lives. The hands that shaped wagon wheels now built a machine of death, a grim twist of fate. On December 7, 1875, George Rope was led out. He climbed the 12 steps, steps he may have helped measure and cut. The chaplains stood by. Their solace had come too late to save his life, and far too late for Hannah Jane Rope. What can we truly learn from this sad and terrible tale? First and foremost, it testifies to how grief and loss, left untended, can destroy a life. George Rope's descent began with the death of his wife and children, a sorrow so profound it unmoored him from the life he knew. He sought refuge in alcohol, but the rum did not drown his sorrow. It watered the seeds of violence, clouded his mind, stole his judgment, and left him with a blank where memory should be. A single act sent shockwaves through a family and a community. Hannah Jane Rope's husband and 3 children faced life without her. This story also speaks to deep roots. George's grandfather, Anthony Rope, arrived with the first fleet. The family helped build a new colony. Survivors, builders, contributors to modern Australian history. Let the sharp image of this story serve as warning and guide. He helped build the gallows. Let that remind us to choose a different path when faced with pain. Do not turn to the bottle. Seek those who will sit with you in your grief. Trust in friends, family, and kind leaders. The chaplains showed that calm, caring voices can reach troubled hearts. Their work brought comfort at the end. Seek that comfort at the beginning. Choose help, choose peace, choose hope.